meeting to order. Everybody here is familiar with the process, so we're not going to go through Zoom procedures. You guys have the agenda in front of you. Does anyone have anything they want to change? I'm just going to be chairing until Ariane gets here. Looks good? Okay. Without hearing any opposition, we'll consider the agenda approved. Comments from the chair. Happy New Year. And as I said, comments from the chair really are that Ariane will be showing up a little bit late, but she'll be here. And I don't have a lot of other things to mention. I don't know if anyone else has anything, but we're probably good to move on to general business. Is there something somebody wants to comment that is not on the agenda for tonight? Peter.
Hi. I just wanted to first say how much improved I think the housing chapter is. I think the aspirations and goals statements have really are some very good edits, and I also think that the strategies. I see the hand of the housing committee here. I think there's a lot of new things on here that I think are very great and actionable, and there've been an elimination of some things that really were just things of the past. So I laud that. Here's my concern. There are two strategies here which have been singled out as being very important, and I agree that they are very important. And that's the ADU program and the development agreement program. The problem is there's less there than meets the eye. I've pursued recently and in the past both of these, and it's near impossible to actually do anything through them. It's even difficult to find out how to get through to them. The ADU program at this point seems to be kind of in the hands of Downstreet, who kind of have some money sometimes. But right now, I can't even get an answer from the people in Downstreet who supposedly are in charge of it. They don't seem to have any money from VHIP. And VHIP, I'm not sure VHIP is really available to people unless they meet certain income requirements themselves, or the people they're going to rent to meet their income requirements. So I'm not sure whether it's going to be any more successful than the original pilot was, which didn't really lead to very many ADUs, and the ADUs it led to were extremely expensive. So I'm concerned about implementation. The plan looks way better than it did, but I'm really concerned about implementation. The development agreement, Josh was at the city council meeting the other day talking about the major obstacles for the Isabel Circle use of the development agreement. That's a large one. And I know Josh ran the numbers for me for a small one that I was interested in. I still would have, in order to donate 2 lots to Habitat for Humanity, I would have spent almost $500,000 of my own money for infrastructure. That's crazy. So I know there's not much you could do as a planning commission except to tell the planning department, where's the beef? Get the beef. How are you going to make this happen? It sounds great. It sounds absolutely great when you read the plan now. But how are you going to actually make this happen? Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Peter. And I guess on those 2 points, what I'll say is that these 2 programs are both programs that are continuing to be worked on. They're 2 relatively new programs. The ADU, it's been a pilot program, but it's now been funneled through the housing committee, and it was their decision to work with Down Street because that's kind of where the state money is, and so that's where things are going. And in any new program, there are going to be issues that have to get worked out. From the planning perspective, we're kind of looking at things more at the 50,000 foot. We know we need an ADU program. We know we need development agreements. The fact that each one of these programs has some issues right now doesn't mean we shouldn't have them in there or that there aren't going to be issues. We need to continue to work and refine and make those better. But yes, we recognize those are challenges, but we also recognize the only way we're going to learn what works and doesn't work is to actually jump in. And the development agreement, for example, is one that we got conflicting advice from our bond attorney. And because the development agreements have to go to a public bond, what the bond attorney said at the start of the process was different than what he said at the end of the process. So having spent 5 or 6 months working on a development agreement towards a point in time, that ended up not being a viable alternative. So we ended up having to kind of pull back and recalibrate, but we learned, and we'll follow up on that going forward to know we need to have a different system in order to make it work. And these are all financial agreements. The city can always step up and say, we're going to have the taxpayers foot some of the bill. What the policy says is, and what the directive we got from city council was, if we're going to do a development agreement, it's because the project pays for itself. And in Peter's case, his project wouldn't pay for itself. It wouldn't develop enough capacity, wouldn't generate enough taxes in order to pay for the benefit. So it's not that we don't want that to happen. It's just, it's purely a math game, and the math wasn't there for that project. The math was there and is there for Isabel Circle, but the mechanism to get there just didn't come together. And, we can talk about that more, but that's from the planning standpoint, that's where these two are at. Thank you. I'm glad to see that the amendments and changes that they came as a result, Peter, of a lot of the comments you made, a lot of the comments everybody else made. As we said, we take these comments seriously. We want to make a better and better product. And so we think we're happy with where we got with the housing chapter, and we'll continue to work on it. And if it needs more refining, we'll make more revisions to it. But that one is there right now. Any other public comments on things not on the agenda? Yeah, okay. It's not on the next agenda item? Or
Don't see applications on the agenda.
the next item would be discussing the written comments from Chief Nordenson on the dispatch plan. So if we're all set, we can move on to number 4. You got comments not related to the, okay. Then you'll need to be on a microphone for people at home to hear.
So again, I'm getting more and more concerned that the public engagement, the process, who's driving this, and the vague weak tea, pablum, that I'm seeing is not going to pass muster as a plan. It's likely not going to get recently approved. I mean, I could talk later about the land use, about Country Club Road as one example, but I'm seeing that the experiment to go web-based has failed, that the public is not engaged with this process. There's no visioning going on here, and to read again in this, stuff that'll come up later, that the planning is complete. Oh, well, then we'll take that up in the later planning. I mean, like circular logic, that without specifics of what we're going to build where, what we intend to be. Well, I noticed that we've had a downtown plan that says walkable and make sure that we're interconnecting and so the city leases the Haney lot, which one that is? The one by Julio's down to the river. And the Haney lot then has a grade up to the back of the Capitol Plaza lot, which then has a grade up to the bike path. And so I requested the plans, and the plan showed in effect a walkway coming down that round wall. So to connect the bike path down to the Capitol Plaza lot down to the Haney lot so that people could walk there. Meanwhile, 90-year-old ladies are trying to scramble up these dirt rough banks, and for no reason documented anywhere, that walkway and those ramps were removed as we built the bike path. Typical Fraser mismanagement. And nobody speak about it. There's nothing in this plan, and we're going to actually connect these lots so that pedestrians and handicapped people can. That's just one example. But now there's 10,000 pounds of snow plowed right there where people try to walk between those lots. So these are the things that if you don't not only articulate that we're going to sustain our walkability between our downtown locations, but how are we going to implement it? I appreciate Peter's attention to the housing chapter, because what this looks like is a lot of excuse, delegate it all to the zoning board so that the officials can manipulate it and let the projects through. This town has a reputation for facilitating those that play by its rules and punishing those that don't. And that's not the way to encourage development in your town. That's a corrupt city government. And I'll just call it that, because it's been going on way too long, and Fraser's about to be shown the door. But this plan is supposed to last 7 years. And for you to not take seriously that we are nowhere close to having a capital improvement plan or a plan for Country Club Road that's going to get us a growth center, or that's going to get us a TIF district, right? Or a new town center, and not even talk about it. I mean, I've gotten 1 or 2 emails back that you've even seen the stuff that I've sent to you, but I've spent hours, untold hours, putting that stuff together and researching it to try to show y'all how to do your job. It's not okay to just let Mike lead you around by the nose and offer this kind of pablum, So I hope that you're gonna get a fresh wind and take this seriously, because if we lose, there will be more floods, and if we lose this September deadline to get our growth center, we will not be able to. The public will probably force us to sell the country club property, which means we will lose our resilient staging area for the next flood. So I can't say it more clearly that y'all need to get engaged and start talking about this stuff. Why this isn't even on the agenda for these things I've raised the last 2 or 3 meetings, as if they're not worth talking about.
Yeah, thank you for all your emails. It's clear that you are doing your research. And so, yeah, I appreciate the information that you're sending our way.
But can you persuade a majority of your board or leadership to put it on the agenda and talk about it in a public forum and get it on the record of what we are and aren't going to do different? I don't need you to answer that question now, but thank you.
All right. I guess I'll just respond to at least one piece in there. There were designs to make the connections to the bike path. Those were also included as a part of the parking garage, and the parking garage was killed in court, and we don't have the right. We can't just build across private property. We have to have permission to build across other people's property, and we don't have permission to build that connection. So that's why that connection, we had the permission as it pertained to the parking garage. So that's why that connection wasn't made and hasn't been made yet, is simply because that isn't there, and there hasn't been a funding source to go through and acquire those property rights. So on to.
Actually, I'll rebut that, because those plans for that bike path preceded any concept of the garage, and those plans were in there, and it was a mistake of the planning department to not negotiate the easement of 4 more feet out from the round retaining wall. So it was an oversight. It was a mistake. It had nothing to do with the parking garage getting killed. Those plans were renewed with the parking garage plan, but they preceded it, and they were removed for no logical reason. So this is the example of the.
Stephen, that's enough. because
Deceit.
you're giving half the information because we didn't have the right to build it.
No, we would have had to pay for.
We
the
would have
easement.
had to have paid for the easement, and we didn't have the resources to pay for the easement on a project that was underfunded. So it was built into the other project. So we still can't do it because we still don't have the money. The small piece it cost us like $100,000 for a piece of property about the size of that table in order for us to get to the point where we were able to build the bike path bridge. The people we were negotiating with are people who know we need the resource and are going to get the resource, get as much money as they can out of it. And it simply was not in the budget.
But the new hotel owner was a whole new ballgame, and
It's different, and we're not in that place right now. So, it wasn't for any fault or any deceit that anybody is working on. So the discussion regarding that we had, there had been some discussion about dispatch and having some folks from dispatch come in. I talked with Chief Nordenson about coming in and talking about the plan that was presented. He took a look at the plan. Kerry looked at the plan. They're satisfied with the plan. He gave some written comments to you about that really kind of summarizes what the dispatch is. We operate a regional dispatch. And what he didn't want to do is come in and have a debate with Kim and Steven and spend all this meeting because we've got a lot of stuff on our agenda. And it's to rehash all of the old history about why we are, because Steven and Kim are going to have one interpretation of the past, and Carrie and Eric are going to have a different interpretation of how we got to where we are. But where we are is we are operating a regional dispatch. We plan to continue the regional dispatch. There are 2 studies that are currently going on that will determine and potentially change, depending on what City Council says and what these 2 studies say. One is, and it's in our plan, in our storyboard, is the one that was talked about, is the Televate study. So Televate study number 1, and this is where it starts to get confusing, was to look regionally at how we can get all of the equipment, the proper equipment, because we operate a regional dispatch. How do places in Woodbury and Calais, how do we communicate with them, and how can we improve the infrastructure so we can communicate with them better, and what should we be moving towards? And I know Steve wants us to go to a different technology.
no, we don't know that.
The Televate study is looking at what the technology should be and where we should be going. That's Televate number 1. There's now a second study, and the state has hired Televate again to do a study on regionalization.
That's not true either.
So my understanding is the second one
Mission Critical Partners is the vendor doing the plan. Televate is a project manager facilitating the interviews.
Okay, well, Televate is in the second one. He sent out the work plan on, just if I could find out where he put.
I think Kim and I can frame this history more accurately.
We're not talking history, and that's what he was trying to avoid. He didn't want to come in here and have a big debate on the history. This one, Vermont Public Safety Communication Task Force. So there is now a Public Safety Communications Task Force, statewide public safety communication system planning. So now they're looking at a statewide system, and Televate is working as a part of this project as well. They're going to go through and study, and they're going to come up with findings that will eventually trickle down to how we operate our dispatch or have to make changes to our dispatch. So we've got 2 different studies. And what he wanted to do is not get into a debate on what we can and should be doing, because we really have to wait till the findings of these reports come out. Then we're going to have direction to move forward.
Yeah, conclusion of these reports is going to be.
The schedule I have is issuing management summary October 28th. So yeah, I don't know. Do you know what the end study date is? That'll be the end of this year. So at that point, we'll be able to review, and the city council will probably be forced into making some review.
Yeah, so can we
I can't.
incorporate, or can we incorporate that, the fact that these studies are coming down the pike into just some mention of this, that this is coming, that we need to talk about this next year? Steve,
You don't need
Steve,
to ask Mike's permission for what you want to do, but there will be a report at the end of this month to the legislature from these vendors. It'll be a menu of options for system design. One of them will probably be a statewide system like Mike referred to at $300 or $400 million. And the other will be building these regional systems that already exist into a failover mode and getting them hardened to anticipate emergencies that could happen any day. So that could fall in line, and there will be comments on there on the need for regional governance. But if you recall, this operating committee that runs this for-profit shop that they're calling the regional dispatch hasn't met in 20 years. So there is no governance other than the private meetings between the chiefs and the city manager. So that is not regional governance. The folks that take our services and pay for it have no say in, and nor has anybody addressed the issue of the man we killed due to faulty information from a dispatcher. Right? That's a
But that's not
fundamental issue.
that's not going to be something that falls into the city plan. That's
Whether we join a properly governed regional authority or reform the one we dissolved maliciously is something that should be in the plan. Because we cannot afford to continue spending $500,000 a year, even if we get another 400,000 from other towns. We shouldn't be spending $500,000 while we leave people sleeping outside at 0 degrees. If I may be blunt.
I'm not sure that I follow why people sleeping outside
it's
has to do with the,
We're spending $500,000 for our top flight shop that has not accountable to anybody.
but how much are we going to spend?
As
On a
a
regional,
regional, that
that-
needs to be developed.
that-
If that will be developed based on what's in our plan for how we're regionalization and county scale government is on the agenda in the legislature. It's on the agenda at the RPC. Regionalization and county scale government cannot be avoided. We need to be thinking about it and building that into our approach of our plan, not continuing a unregulated monopoly that's accountable to no one.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But also, when was that is within the past 2 years that the city voted not to move forward?
I'll let Kim was chair of the regional authority and he can recount history.
Well, we're trying not to get, I'm just saying that, this was something that recently the city voted on.
No, well, the city colluded with Barry to put the regional authority out of business so they could maintain their monopoly unaccountable service.
By putting it on the ballot?
Yes, and misrepresenting who's doing what and how functional it is and the costs and the cost sharing and the governance. Yes, it was more of the same for this city. It's time to clean it up, and the plan is a guide for cleaning it up. But I think you should hear from Kim. Was our attorney, the state's attorney general back in the day, and he has stayed involved, and he chaired the regional public safety authority, and he watched a city councilor who was unelected for Adrian's seat collude with Fraser to demolish the regional authority. The regional authority had bonding authority to pay for and maintain. The mutual aid system does not. We're not going to bond to replace the radio system, so it's gone. We were told the sky is falling, it's going to die 2 years ago. It still hasn't died, and it won't die 2 years from now, but we do need to replace it. And we need to replace it in an integrated fashion that includes filling the cellular gaps. What good is a radio system that can call the cops if you're in a dead zone and can't call say you need a cop? That's not a rhetorical question. That's a fundamental question. What are you going to say about completing the cellular canopy? I don't mean to hog this, Kim. You speak up on your wise words.
I think it would be a good idea for you to be quiet, go in the back,
Oh, I'll be quiet.
and prefer you when I ask.
Out of respect for your seniority, I will.
I was also the chair of this committee for 5 years. And
Kim, I'm just gonna move this mic closer so that you get caught on the recording.
your goal, the goal is to, let me back up. Dispatching is a crucial function for fire and police. And it's not a simple job. It's complex technologically, emotionally, and in a whole lot of other ways. And proper planning needs to take that into account. I would hope that what the planning commission was looking at is to look a little bit at the past, because past is always a prediction of future if you study it enough. And then try to avoid some of the problems that prevented, at least in my view, from moving forward. And pay attention to what's going on in the rest of the world. A plan for Montpelier would be, how can we have best dispatching at the least cost? In 2018, well, I don't want to debate Mortensen, but the short history was the Central Vermont Public Safety Authority devised a plan in 2018 which had the backing of the unions. They wanted to have a consolidated all the dispatchers in one system, Barry and Montpelier, because they wanted a bigger pond to play on. They wanted to have some way to grow in their job and not spend their lives in one little hole with no process to gain knowledge and serve the public. And the only way to do that, I don't know how familiar you are with what happens here, but Montpelier claims to be a regional dispatch system. What it actually is a contractual arrangement with a mutual aid society in the towns. And it's profitable to Montpelier. What killed, in my view, consolidation which would have saved money, gotten better dispatchers. And, oh, I gotta say one other thing. I refer collectively to the towns, the mutual aid society for the towns that surround Montpelier. And Mike mentioned Elevate. When I was chair of the Public Safety Authority, after the merger, the actual creation of a regional system was defeated. I became chair. I wanted to salvage what I could. And we had a little bit of money left. So we hired Televate essentially to do a technological study as to how to improve the communications amongst the towns and the city. The towns don't have the money to maintain a complex system. And the only way they ever got started was, first of all, to get a federal grant. That didn't include maintenance. They were unable over time to get the money to keep the towers up and to keep the communications going. And what's happening now is their volunteer firefighters and first responders, they're having a hard time finding them because it's a complicated job. It takes a lot of training. And if you want to be the local first responder, you're giving up a lot of your life and a lot of your time. And people are having a hard time wanting to do that. I had a chat with our own chief. He says, I said, look, what's happening here is the two cities have a full-time system and they're going to be having to go into the towns to serve people. And you're going to have to begin negotiating all kinds of agreements to pay our people speaking Montpelier to go to Calais or wherever and rescue people who need medical attention and take them to the hospital. That's the future. And it isn't just dispatching, it's the whole regional coordination of public services that are going to have to materialize. What ultimately happened with the grant request that I worked on 2020 or so, it wasn't funded. When the plan hit the legislature, there was no way to pay to regionalize systems. And it was all coming out of local property taxes. And this is a little rambling, but I did a little study to see what is the per capita cost of dispatching system in the surrounding towns using the tax base that the tax department uses. So you look at your grand list and divide by the number of people, and you'll get a question of what it costs. A factor, and my numbers by memory are somewhere along the line that Montpelier was 15 and Gallus was 25. I'm making those numbers up, but the point is, it was far more expensive to do dispatching in the towns than Montpelier. In part, that's because the towns are paying the Montpelier to keep their, to run the system. And it's profitable. And it's also profitable for Barry, because Barry has a couple of customers, the sheriff's department for one, and another couple of towns. So both the cities are profiting from the existing system. And I interrupted myself, but the problem with the first Elevate grant was the plan hit the legislature, and it was totally unfair for because they only had something like $3 or $4 million, and it wasn't going to do anything for anybody. So that whole plan was scrapped. At the present time in the legislature, I don't know what's going on because unfortunately everything's been in secret. They've been working for a year. I think there's a draft report, but at least in my mind, it's going to be something like the education system. You want the locals to pay something out of their property tax so they pay attention to what's going on and know the people and have hands-on management, but you're going to need state aid because I don't like to bash our leaders, but when they killed the regional plan, the idea was the city would apply for those grants. And that was nuts because the city was never going to fund the maintenance costs for all the towns. So what happened was the towns came up with a plan they would self-fund with Motorola. It would be a lease purchase thing. You can imagine. Well, that's the most economical thing. Would never get through the city because city requires competitive bidding. I'm rambling a little bit, but what I'm trying to get where I think it's headed in the, where I get there. What ultimately killed regionalization was none of the local people wanted to give up any authority that they had. And Barry and Montpelier were sitting in the hot seat making money out of the towns. So there was no one's, and the two cities were paying for the whole thing. So nobody wanted to change. Nobody wanted to give up any authority. Nobody wanted to do anything for planning. And this Nordenson's report is, I don't want to sound like Mr. Whitaker, but it's not worth reading. It has no essence to it looking into the future. It's a report that says, leave me alone. I'm happy with my job. I'm happy with what's going on here. And don't tease me with the problems of the future that are too big for me to solve. The Planning Commission seems to me, Mike alluded to it, I don't know what they're gonna come up with. The whole, they're spending what, $3 million in planning funds between Televate and another outfit called Mission Critical
Just 1 million.
had come up with a statewide plan. And from what little I've heard, they're getting the costs of every town for dispatching. They'll come up with a figure. What's the per capita cost to sit in a town and pay for your dispatching? And how fair is that? And what are the reasons for it? And can we plan effectively to get the equipment? And that plan is coming along. The last time I heard, they'll have a plan, but it'll go to the legislature, which will be chewing on it. And I'm not expecting to do it this session, so it's got to be in the end of this year before they get anywhere with it. In the meantime, equipment ages. People lack effective planning, and ad hoc little arrangements come up to care for people. I don't know whether this body this is an extremely difficult job. And a lot of thoughtful people are stirring the pot, trying to sort a way out how to plan for regional dispatching in the city and the state. And things are not okay. I don't know, this body has limited authority, but to accept this as a plan is to say, leave me alone, I don't care if we have dispatchers or not. Most people have no idea how the system works. If you're in Calais and you make a 911 call, it goes to a state dispatching service. That dispatcher will then call Montpelier, and Montpelier will call Calais and say, get your volunteers on the job. Sometimes all of that is oral. And things get messed up because the state dispatcher is writing something down and making an oral report to Montpelier, and it gets a little garbled. By the time it gets to Calais, it can be different. So you need new technology to do this, to put it all in writing and have a report, and that's expensive. And there's a whole debate of how much the cities don't have the power to get into burning buildings because radios won't penetrate a burning building. So, I mean, they can go in, but they lose contact with their people.
I'm going to try to just go and bring this to
Yes,
a
let me
close.
finish.
We've got to get this. We've got a lot on the agenda.
Thank you, Mike. What I want to just end with is this is a subject of critical importance. And what you have in front of you is nothing. Zilch. If you really want to know what's going on, let's wait for that state report to come out and then follow it in the legislature and educate your legislative representatives to try to get it where you want it to go.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. And Mike, I hope you find that unicorn you're always looking for.
Yep, we're still looking.
Okay. Thank you for listening.
Yep. Thanks, Kim. So, I don't know if you guys have the stuff.
By the way, I do have a copy of the consolidated plan with budgets. I don't know if anybody will want to read it, but if you want to see what,
This is the recent stuff that's going on now or the past stuff?
this is past stuff.
Uh,
It's what we built to,
yeah, I
So
mean,
you could-
as I said, the city plan, and you know this, Kim, you were the chair for 5 years and we worked together, and is, you know, this is the city plan and we're looking at 50,000 feet, not necessarily at, you know, should we have cellular, or should we have some other technology for our dispatch? I mean, that's too fine grained for a city
I-
plan. We're trying to figure out big picture.
the bottom
But-
line is going to be governance, how you figure it out. And that's a planning function.
Yeah. And we know there are passionate people on both sides who disagree. So makes it difficult to identify other than to follow a little bit of the bouncing ball on where things are and where things are going. And I think the key is where we are now is we're providing regional service to 19 communities and 29 public entities. And we should do the best that we can do within that framework until these plans come along that will redefine how these will be funded and how these will be operated going forward. And I don't expect that we're going to change how we operate until we start hearing more until there's a bigger plan in place that says,
I agree with you. There's no money to do it.
yeah, and I don't expect us to put
But what's
in our
likely
city
to
plan that
happen
we're going to
is-
change until we've got a plan to change.
What's likely to happen is your fire department is going to be running around the whole county. Otherwise, people will suffer.
All right, thank you, Kim.
Hmm.
All right, so I'll see if there are any comments or changes that we want on those. As we said, I think dispatch kind of lays out how they are currently operating. We do reference the one. I can try to work on language to insert the strategy of following up on, basically a strategy of follow-up when this second set of studies is released.
I'm sure you want to invite me back to keep this calm. Good night, all.
Thank you, Kim. All right. I don't know if you want to take over or,
Came in late and I don't know where we are. Oh, thank you.
all right, so where's my notes? There are my notes. So let's move forward onto the draft land use chapter text. I did send this out a couple weeks ago in hopes that people would get a chance to maybe take a look at it, maybe make some edits. As some of you know, what we do is we put this together, we write these out because we then give this to SE Group, who's our consultant who builds out the storyboards, and they literally plug the words in. In the past, we had been doing some work And we kind of gave it to them, and then they did their word magic. And what we found was we didn't like their word magic. So we said, we're going to write it and you use our words. And so that's why we develop it in this way, because it's easier for them just to cut and paste it in. Then they insert the pictures and the framework and make it look like the storyboards that you see online.
Are you saying that they were editing?
Yeah, they were going through and editing.
Changing the narrative.
Yeah,
narrative somewhat.
they would change it because they thought it would word better or work better,
Okay.
or this is 3 sentences. We should shorten it up a little bit so that way it fit better into this.
Got it.
And eventually we were like, well, that's not what we wrote, and that's not really
Yeah.
what we meant. So we kind of went through and said, no editing,
We'll
take
care
what we say, and we did the rest of the plan that way. So that's why we write it out before we give it to them. And this is the last chapter. So it's the only chapter that hasn't been built into a storyboard yet. The bullets that are there really kind of get into some of the map features. They've got abilities. You can describe what type of maps you want. In this case, I was thinking these would be buttons you could click on and then be able to see what's the historic district, what's the designated downtown, what's the housing density. You'd have these as available maps that you could look at. So I didn't know, especially from maybe Aaron's standpoint, if Aaron had a chance to take a look at it. He's been usually our chief editor of late.
Yeah, I actually did. And I put pen to paper on this one. But unfortunately I wasn't able to get it wrapped up before this meeting. So I'm probably about 2/3 of the way through the document. I can either send it out to you guys once I get it done, or I can give you what I have now and you guys can look at it. Sorry, I just didn't have enough time.
For one, conceptually, I had no issue. I think it needs some little bit of massaging. So I'm happy to wait for Aaron, Mike, if that doesn't mess up our schedule too much.
I mean, as long as we've got it in the next, let's see, today's Monday. If we got it by Friday, would that be possible, Aaron? Do you think?
Oh yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. I'll send it out to the group as soon as I'm done. So
Then after Aaron sends it out, would we have a chance to discuss it at a next meeting, or is our next meeting going to be, I assume our next meeting is a public input?
I would hope the next meeting would be the public input.
For the land use chapter.
For the 3 chapters,
Oh.
land use, resilience, and community services.
Oh, okay.
Those are the last 3 chapters.
Okay.
Community service and resilience are, I believe the storyboards are ready to go. I'm working with Evelyn on those 2. And we're waiting till the next agenda item on the plan strategies. So that way she could build out the last board, and then we'll have all the boards, all the storyboards, all the implementation boards would be ready to go for the meeting.
Okay, so I guess if we have comments on Aaron's edits, we can just share them at the public input meeting, along with everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, if people have some quick things, you're more than welcome to email them to me. Because if I have it on Friday, I'll probably wait till Monday to send it to SE Group. So if he can get it out by Friday and you guys get me any comments by Monday,
Okay.
we can't debate it online,
Right.
but if you've got things that are like confusing or whatever, we can clear things up. And again, once we've got it and it's in there, it's going to be a draft, and it'll be a draft even in a public hearing. It'll go to public hearing. We can still make changes. So don't get too concerned if there's something that may need to get edited again down the line. It's kind of an iterative process, and we hope it kind of works its way through.
Hand up.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to make sure
Okay.
you guys were all set. If
I
you're
haven't-
set, then I'll.
I have some questions about the maps, but we could start with Peter.
Okay, go ahead, Peter.
I just have a question and a comment about the process. I think we all know that there's already stuff, for example, in the maps that isn't up to date. There's data that isn't up to date, and that's always going to be the case. If this is going to be this dynamic program, who is going to be making the changes? I don't know if you guys were at the last city council meeting, but there was talk about not having a communications coordinator. That's Evelyn. I think you guys need to think about, and I'm going to go back to what I said at the outset, whether this is, if you want to go with this graphic approach, and it's going to cost money to maintain it. And the budget, the city budget is in a very difficult time. Now, maybe you think, well, we're going to think things are going to change and, taxpayers are going to be okay with it. I don't think so. So it's kind of, maybe it's like Steve's comment about a unicorn. How are you going to manage this to keep it so it's not a creaky, out of date, embarrassing document?
All right. So to answer that question, the city plan is going to be, it has to be by state law. It's got to be a fixed document. So even though it is dynamic in how you can interact with the maps, we can't go through and let's say we change our zoning, we change a zoning boundary. We can't go and change the zoning boundary in the town plan without going through a public hearing process to change the town plan. The town plan is fixed, which is why we can't reference pieces we can't like attach ourselves to certain things that are dynamic, because under state law, you are adopting a plan and it has to be a fixed document. And this was what, we've talked with our attorneys about when we started this process. We wanted to do an online plan, and there were certain rules. They said, yes, there's nothing in state law that says a plan has to be paper and has to be written. It can be digital, it can be online, it can be the format that we're using. That's been approved by our city attorneys. But there were certain caveats, and some of them were that, you can't have, there's a lot of, new technology now that lets you have these maps that change over time by gathering data as it's going along. And we can't use those technologies unless the legislature amends some of the state law to give us that ability. Or at least we didn't want to be the guinea pig to go to court to find out whether it's legal. Our attorney said, to be safe, don't use dynamic databases. You have to use fixed databases. So we will plug in the complete streets map, and that will be fixed. And if we want to amend a new complete streets plan, we can do that. And then if we want to incorporate that into the city plan, we would have to then amend our city plan to incorporate that map.
But that's exactly my concern. My concern is that something which is on the web and looks dynamic and acts like it's dynamic, but it really isn't dynamic, is going to bite you in the behind. And I think it would have been better. Now, I understand you got it the way it is now. It would have been better just to do a print version, because when a print version has a copyright date on it, when you read it that it was done and finished, bang. But the expectation when you go online is that a thing is going to change. So what I suggest, since you're committed to this, I suggest you make very clear statements on every page that this is as of 2026 or whenever it's published, and that it is really not a dynamic document, because otherwise you are going to have people be very angry.
Okay, thank you. Noted.
I think that makes some sense. This is a snapshot in time, and to be able to describe it to folks as such, I think is a good idea. My assumption is that these are a snapshot in time, and that data does continue to update, just in a different space. The city's GIS data, I assume, gets updated over time, and people can access that in different manners in a dynamic interactive map, or accessing the data directly. But this is a snapshot. I do think that having a note about that is a good idea. I also think that having it be modern and interactive does a really nice job of engaging the public. So I think this general approach feels really sound to me. I know we're most of the way through it already. But just to note that in terms of public engagement, I think it's a really nice approach.
All right, do we have any other thoughts on the land use text piece? Or are we,
Oh, go ahead.
oh,
It was around the particular maps. It says that we're going to be pulling maps from other chapters for historic district designated downtown housing density, those bullet points there.
yeah, a couple of those notes were for SE group.
Okay.
When they get it, they know where to find it.
That sounds good. And I'm curious about the future Montpelier land use map that's going to be included in this.
Yes,
It's prominent.
that was the one we had
The
for
one we
last
talked
meeting.
about last time.
Yep.
Yeah. And how about the existing and proposed designations map that we discussed last time too?
That should be on this list. It was here's proposed additions to growth center. That's that map.
Yeah. One of the things that we discussed last time, and I don't know if that was updated, but was the proposal to remove the half-mile buffer
Yes,
on that particular map.
and it was removed.
Okay. And I did have one note on the future Montpelier land use map. If it's okay to bring that up. Which is that the North Branch Nature Center property is not noted as rural conservation. I think it should be.
Oh, interesting. Remember where I am.
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky. So the large parcel that's on the northeastern part of town is within the rural conservation. It's the piece along Route 12.
And this is the land use.
Oh yeah, sorry, future Montpelier land use map.
That's where I've got to be.
And I'm noting that it is on the 2017 master plan map, and it's noted as municipal, which is not on this current map, but I do think it should be rural conservation.
Over here. Very hard time. There I am. Right. So there we go. So you are talking about,
I'll point to it on the screen just to do it, but this property here is
also owned by the Nature Center?
That's, I believe that's where the nature center itself is located.
Oh, yep. You are correct.
Near that
Yep,
around that
yep.
meander.
Good eye.
I was comparing in the 2017 to the current. And I know that it's a beloved spot and other people have making note of it too.
And
if
it's
it didn't.
conserved, so it's not like,
Yes, it is
but it
conserved.
should be, yes, that parcel was missed. We got the other side of
Yep.
but not that side. All right.
And then one other note, and there are, if you look at the protected lands database for Vermont, there are some land trust easements. I'm not sure how the city wants to classify those, but some of them are noted as rural agriculture and forestry. And I don't know if we want those to be rural conservation as well, but that's just
Yeah, I think it would depend on what the easement is for.
that makes sense. Yep.
but yes, we could certainly expand this over time if we wanted to.
Cool. My biggest point was the North Branch Nature Center. So
Yep.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, and I think the ones I caught were conserved. So
Yep.
the other ones have easements. So yeah, that's certainly, we could certainly look into that in the future. We could certainly talk to the Conservation Commission to see if they could do a little bit of work on that.
Sure. Yeah, that would be good to get their input.
All right, so I've got one, the new strategy to talk about revisiting based on the findings of Televate, or I'll get the full description of that so it's accurate. Put the data as of note because it can't be dynamic. We should have a note in that. 3, I've got missed the Nature Center as nature conservation on future land use. Any other thoughts?
I just had some comment. Oh, did you? Oh, no. Okay. On the storyboard, and maybe these are, I don't know if Aaron's gonna note these as well, but it said in this chapter, we will reinforce the goals and strategies identified in some plans and resolve conflicts that have been identified in the synergies. And I wasn't sure if we were really doing that. I don't know. That just seemed like a very ambitious statement. And so I wasn't sure about in what way we're resolving the conflicts, because it seems like we're still saying we're going to do everything, have that's what to me.
Yeah, we don't always resolve the conflicts and the synergies. We point out the conflicts and the synergies in a number of times, but we don't necessarily always resolve them.
So we're pointing out the conflicts where are we pointing out the conflicts or?
Well, I mean, in general, for synergies, we've done that to talk about our goals for protecting historic resources. That's going to run into conflict with our resiliency goals. Our historic buildings are the ones that are the least resilient. So we've got a conflict there between how do we get more resilient while at the same time protecting those historic resources or meeting our energy goals. We want to be energy efficient, but to be energy efficient, we've got to replace the windows that are historic. We've got a conflict here. Do we want to give up our historic character from the key they use like historic integrity of the building and losing the windows, or having to remove the clapboards in order to insulate the building and then put new clapboards on? It's like, well, it's still got wooden clapboards, but they're not 200-year-old wooden clapboards anymore. And that loses, as the historic preservation folks would say, loses historic integrity. But those are just areas where we have conflicts that we need to work through as a community to decide how we have those.
Yeah, I guess I just didn't remember that we actually did. We've talked about the conflicts, I think, internally,
but I don't
didn't know if that text was really in the city plan, which, I mean, I'm okay with. I imagine most city plans have these inherent sort of conflicts with all their different goals. And, I know that we talked at one time about trying to prioritize things, but I think that's really difficult to kind of do in a city plan, I think, when you have to cover all these different areas. But I guess I would recommend just taking that sentence out.
Just very quickly, I don't have the draft in front of me, but I did note that as well. And I think I changed the language. I proposed language something like reconciling competing interests or something like that. I don't have it off the top of my head. So I know what you're talking about. It struck me as I knew what Mike was saying, but that did strike me as a little different when I saw it. So I think that's what I put in. You'll see it when I give you my draft.
Okay.
Perfect.
Great. Awesome. And then I just noted this, and this might be a larger thing to think about, but the synergies having housing that is walkable and bikeable to downtown which I fully support and is important. But sometimes I've heard people say in public meetings in Montpelier, like, oh, you don't want to put more housing in my neighborhood because it's not walkable. Whereas I think like it's still better to have housing in Montpelier than in the outlying town. So I just wonder about having, I don't know, when we talk about housing, how we, I don't have unfortunately language to suggest, but I just noted that.
Yeah.
That was something that I was noting as well for myself.
Yeah.
And I think big picture, what I was trying to get across, and Aaron can work it into the language and maybe say it better than I did, is really land use is where we can have that discussion of, transportation is talking about complete streets and having walkable and bikeable neighborhoods. But how we arrange our city is the land use. So, if you go to the other extreme examples, go to Connecticut and New Jersey and places that were strictly Euclidean zoning, where you had this part of town is all residential and this part of town is all commercial and that part of town is all industrial. You could build all the sidewalks you want. It's not walkable and bikeable because it's simply everything is all spread out. So when you can start to arrange your city in such a way where you have small neighborhoods that are close by, you live in the meadow, but you can walk to Elm Street to pick something up, or you're close enough to downtown, you could walk downtown or bike downtown. It's not really meant to be that this is too far out. And certainly with e-bikes now, I live, at the top of a hill, and people go by all the time on bikes. Not today, not right now, but during the summer, e-bikes, people can go, these neighborhoods that really weren't bikeable in the past are bikeable now. And it doesn't say that everybody, nobody's going to be allowed to drive their car. So, I mean, people can still drive to the downtown. But the idea is the more we can have walkable and bikeable communities, that's the goal that we want to have, are communities where you can have walking bike, because not everybody can drive. So the more people can walk, the more people can bike, the more access people have to the entire community. So that's kind of big picture, and you guys kind of work it in, but the land use chapter is where that happens. That's where how we start to arrange things is how we can allow those to happen.
And we talked about one of the goals is expanding the infrastructure. Just because your neighborhood doesn't have a sidewalk right now, doesn't mean that it cannot have a sidewalk in the future.
Yeah, and we've got the complete streets plan, which is actually quite nice. It needs to be updated again. We did it once, and it really kind of broke the entire city into to have 7 different types of roadways. Really depended on what the road speed was, and to make sure that every use, biking, walking, driving, all would be able to be operated safely with each other. So in certain cases, a dead end street with 5 houses doesn't need a sidewalk, because you could walk and bike on the side of the road safely, because you only have one car every 45 minutes and it's a 25-mile-an-hour street. So it's presumably a safe place to operate without it. But in other places, we do recognize in that plan. And when we did the plan, we were able to start finding it was a little bit, isn't it ironic? And at the same time, we were like, well, it's not really. All the complaints that we get are on this street, this street, this street, and this street. And all those streets fail to meet their street typology. They should have a sidewalk, but they don't. And those are the places we're getting the complaints. It's like, well, that actually follows. So the plan, just because a plan says, Sherwood Drive, if you're familiar with that, kind of tucks down, that should have a sidewalk, and it doesn't. And you'll get people go and say, that's just not a safe place. Well, it's not, because it's supposed to, according to the engineering metrics that we put together, it should have sidewalks, and it doesn't. But will it? hopefully at some point it's at least been identified. It's on a list that says we should. Now it costs money to do it. It costs money to maintain it. And we'll have to debate whether that's the priority over another place. But those are the types of things that land use, like I said, is kind of this where everything starts to come together. We also had a goal in the plan. Many of you weren't here when we did natural resources, of being within a 5-minute walk or a 10-minute walk of a natural area or a park. Well, that comes back to land use. Where we put the parks, we've got to start then matching those up with where our neighborhoods are. So that's a lot of where the land use is kind of looking at those big fundamental pictures and how we arrange our city.
Okay, yeah, I get that. I guess I might suggest that we add something in that bullet point that just also acknowledges, kind of what Sean said, that we're also working to bring infrastructure to make, I don't know, some way to maybe massage it.
Yep, I don't disagree.
Just so you know, I don't have it in front of me. I looked at that too. I can't remember the language that I plugged in, but it's something like the land use plan bridges the ideal of what we want with, concrete sort of objectives that allow us to realize those goals or something like that. It's flowery, but I think it'll get us there.
I will take flowery.
I have one more.
Okay.
That I can send to you afterwards, or we can discuss it now.
On that future land use map again?
Yeah.
I can share my map again. It's still there. All right.
Go to the north. This parcel here is owned by the city and
Oh, is that the new one we picked up?
recently purchased. Yeah.
And that's Gould Hill?
Yep.
Okay.
And it now in the current parcels, it's just it's a single parcel with the North Branch property to the south. So
Okay.
to incorporate it with the North Branch trails on the hillside there. It's got a beautiful trail on it. Yeah, you should. And it connects to East Montpelier trails too.
All right. So I will await Aaron and your comments for next Monday, and then I will get that off to build that out. That's good. Next piece we had the land use implementation plan. So it was an Excel spreadsheet that had aspirations on the first, the goals on the second. I don't remember, did we review aspirations and goals already? Don't think so. Okay. And then the strategies, and the strategies are fairly limited because we're talking broad brush things. So we're talking about our zoning bylaws, our river hazard regulations, our the Country Club Road project, the CIP, the designated downtown, continue to participate in the growth center program and expand the district as appropriate, and update the green print and continue its implementation. And that will take the language from I didn't type in the entire language from the natural resource plan. So that was why I was telling them, take that from natural resources. And the green print plan is the plan that talks about having a park within every 5-minute walk. And so they actually identified areas, and it was done, gosh, that must be 15, 20 years ago by now. And so it really is a project that Alec has been wanting to kind of, in the Parks Commission kind of wanted to get back to take another look at, to go through and say, let's make sure we've identified these and it's there. So
I have one more aspiration on the second. The areas that provide recreational opportunities and protect instead of provides, protects.
Yep.
And then my question, how specific do we need to be in this to check the state's boxes for the growth center requirements to be able to reapply?
So the reapplication pieces, the primary piece is that it has to be in the plan, which it is in the strategies, and it's also on the map under the proposed map that you guys looked at last week. And that will be in the land use section as well as, I believe, the housing chapter. So that map will show up in a couple other places. From the plan standpoint, there's not a lot that has to be in this plan. There's a lot of planning that has to go in. We've got a lot of that in that actionable plan that you guys, I think you guys have seen. So that's the larger document, the larger planning document that gets into the conceptual plan that exists and the specific studies that are going to go on after that. And then there are other pieces that will happen that are outside of the city plan. So we'll have to develop a capital budget for that project, which we have, but we'll have to formalize it and put that all together and get that approved.
And that has to be approved by the city council.
That will be, yes, that has to go through city council.
And then my second question is that, so I attended the regional planning commission presentation last month.
The Act 181. Yeah.
Yes, the new designations. And the thing that alarmed me was when somebody said that they don't think anywhere in the county will get 1A designation. So there was something that was
Somebody at the public said, or something at one of the RPC
one of the
staff said.
RPC folks said that, and what do we have to do here to get 1A?
All right,
We
so
need to
that's
have one.
strange because I had a meeting with them.
They might have meant it to be
They have
more
missed.
aimed at the folks who are attending who weren't in Montpelier and Barrie, but that was what it was said to everybody.
Yeah. So that's strange. I have had a meeting. So we have sent the links to all this document to the CVRPC, and they've been going through and we've been working together to make sure that this plan meets and checks all the boxes that are required for the regional plan. For those designations, so I put this map back up here. So if you've got your online maps, you can see we chose, and we did not have to, we chose the Regional Planning Commission is required to use 11 designations in the regional land use map. We are not required to meet those, to use any of those standards. And those were the ones that I think I gave you guys a couple weeks ago. And this kind of goes through some of them we don't use. We don't have a hamlet, and we don't have some of these other ones. So, but I thought my approach is if we have to meet, and this is a fairly good way to break up your town. So the advantage we have is we're putting together our map before they put together their map. So we're going to kind of be in compliance because we're going to put this together and presumably hand it to them, and they're going to use that as the foundation for building their map. And I've asked them how you would like to see these designations laid out. And we went through each one. Here's the rural area. It doesn't have sewer and water. It meets your definition of rural. I chose these areas, rural ag forest, based on the fact that these ones were conserved. And so these should be in there, but we have others like the England farm it's designated as rural because it's not conserved. So that was the decision. The changes they made, this is version 4.0, you guys have version 3.0, is in my conversations with them, we had along Eastern Gateway and Western Gateway, so the areas by the roundabout and the areas up past the high school, those areas we had put in as infill. And they disagreed with that. They said, I don't think we could call these infill because infill means you plan to convert these into higher density mixed use developments. I don't think we're going to expect Department of Labor and the liquor and the high school and all these areas that are also in the floodplain to be considered likely places that we would be pushing for infill. They recommended we should make these as enterprise. And enterprise are basically areas that are identified as more commercial or industrial. So we had a little spot over by Gallison Hill where Cabot and Blodgett and those guys are all located. We said that'll be our enterprise zone because, you know, that's an area that's industrial. They recommended making most of that all Tractor Supply should be enterprise, not that. So they agreed with the other designations that we made. They liked what we chose. They agreed these areas would be good for growth. The Sabins pasture and Country Club Road are planned growth areas. The orange areas I had labeled urban residential. Apparently there is no urban residential, so it's been renamed neighborhood residential just for putting it on the table. So you guys know that change was made to the legend. They did agree with this assessment here. Remember, we had a conversation a little bit about how Crestview overlaps with an area that the state has said this is unfragmented forest, and we should not fragment this forest. And it's also our growth center. So I said, we're going to keep it in here as growth center because we're going to say growth center trumps it. And they agreed. So they're on board. They agree with that. Obviously, all of this will go through a process. But we've had that conversation. They're on the same page as we have these conversations. They're kind of like, yes, I agree. That's a good evaluation. We added in that as a natural area. That is the Home Farm Way property that is being purchased. It's already conserved. It's being purchased. It'll eventually be turned over to the city to be designated for floodplain access, and it'll have a bunch of stuff removed. So that made sense to be natural area as well. So those were the changes that I made, but that's a little bit of the answer to the question of, does it start to check the boxes? Yes. You know, these are the purposes right here. And somewhere over here, I've got the other ones, the other statutes that have the other requirements. And so we are going through right now, as we're proofreading this, to go through and say, you know, there are requirements. You have to designate areas that show this. You have to have these types of goals and aspirations. I'm turning this over to them. They're the ones who are going to do the regional approval to make sure this checks all the boxes on their end. So they're going through and doing the same thing. If we find anything is missing, we'll make changes. But right now, we think we've checked the boxes for what's required of a plan, and we think we've checked all the boxes that are going to be required for the regional, for the amended growth center application. Although there are other pieces of the growth center application still have to be done, we think we've got what we need in the draft city plan right now.
There's a lot in here.
Yes.
But I have a question around to tack onto this. Is the urban growth boundary expansion to include Elks Club completely necessary to get to the point of which I assume is the point of getting the tier 1A classification for Act 250 exemptions
And TIF.
and TIF.
It's less necessary for Act 250, more necessary. It's a requirement for TIF as TIF stands right now. As TIF stands right now, the only way we can qualify for a TIF is if it's within a growth center. So we have to have the growth center in order to qualify for the TIF, which is the tool to build the infrastructure.
Yeah. My concern at the moment is that we are putting a lot of time and energy into this, that we are checking all the boxes. We are checking with all the right people for checking the boxes. We're getting approval. Yes, yes, yes. My concern is that in 6 months or so, when this happens again, that we will get derailed on a separate statute.
We will be, as I said, all I can say is we're going to be looking through everything now with a fine tooth comb to make sure that things are there. There were opportunities, unfortunately, we didn't take advantage of that looking back, we probably could have. And we will see how we get there.
Yeah.
I mean, whether it's the state wants us to get there, the Regional Planning Commission wants us to get there, City Council wants us to get there, we want to get there. So a lot of times it's a matter of when we send it to the state, they're going to review it. And if they come back, we're going to be working. Once we've got this draft plan done, then it's open for public comment.
Sure.
And I start working on the growth center piece because we're going to start getting those preliminary pieces ready to go, because we can put these things out to the state early. We can put these out to the Regional Planning Commission early. In the same way that we don't have to have the regional approval of the plan until after it gets adopted, but we are putting it in early. So that way regional approval can go through, and then we know, if they go through and they say, hey, you got to change this one map.
Yeah.
We haven't adopted the plan and then have to go back and amend the plan because we forgot one map.
I think that is all great. And this is exactly the path that we should be taking. And I fear that in that moment of decision, that it'll be actually be pushed back to potentially editing or amending the entire process or all of the statutes at a state level to be able to get this done. My concern is that which I said, I think in the first or second meeting, is that there is not a lot of precedent for this. The only precedent set was, I think, in 2019 by Montpelier previously. And so I think everybody could want this to happen who is involved. But yet we could get.
Yeah, from the growth center standpoint, the growth center amendment standpoint, yes, we were the only ones who went through it.
Yeah.
And until Stephen pointed it out, the state had the process, and the state process. Now we have to go through with the full application.
Got it.
The decision we have is that the application, though, only has to apply to the amended parcel.
Okay.
So we don't have to. We're not reapplying for the entire district. We're applying for the parcel.
Great.
So that narrows the amount of the application. And yes, it'll be a process, and we will see what the state and the RPC says.
Great.
The section that does comments.
Are you guys set?
I am.
Okay.
So it's important to distinguish, just like Mike is not the planning commission, staff is not the board of commissioners. Mike happens to be a commissioner. It's very rare for, a staff person to be a commissioner, but the regional planning commissioners are more engaged and skeptical, especially when our growth center expansion has a concept plan, which this language is even contradictory. It says the city has completed the planning phase and developed an actionable plan for the Country Club Road where new housing may be built to meet the high demand that exists. The entire plan can be downloaded. That has never been adopted, despite the city putting it on their website that it's adopted. Josh represented to the county economic development folks that it was adopted. It is not adopted. It is draft. If you read the plan from Whitenberg, that so-called actionable plan, it says again and again that this is going to be changed and modified with all the public engagement. So far, y'all are the only public engagement there is, and y'all aren't much on that regard. You don't have much public engagement in this process. So the whole Country Club Road, to turn that from a concept into a plan is nobody's business right now. Nobody's insisting upon it, but you're going to need that to get regional plan approval, especially if you're proposing to build. This concept plan proposes to build all that housing on prime ag soils. And that's not going to fly. I mean, that's an agricultural district in the existing regional plan. It's a rural district with prime ag soils. And so far, we don't have anything that reassures the regional commissioners that we're going to respect those prime ag soils. And I don't even hear y'all talking about it. It's like, oh yeah, sure, point to the actual plan, build condos and townhouses all over the prime ag soils. That's irresponsible. That's reckless. It's not going to fly.
I'm just having trouble following here. So you want development out there, but you don't want to disturb any prime ag soils. And
I'm not sure we will preserve every inch of prime ag soils, but every square foot of prime ag soils. But no, we should not be building on prime ag soils.
Okay.
And I doubt we're going to get approved for a growth center that competes with a regional plan that currently says you don't build. But this language says that we have a plan, and then it says we don't have a plan. If you read that top box,
This won't go into effect until the end of the year. And by the end of the year,
well, then we won't get our growth center application in by September.
all right, this has to be done at the same time as that growth center application, correct? And
It has to be approved
in
by the
order for
commission
us
and
to submit this, we will have that actionable plan. The city council will approve it.
Oh, no, it's not even ready. It's not designed. The whole design process has been halted by the
Steve,
flood.
that's the plan in place and the plan that will be used. These are conceptual plans that lay out pieces. This is an iterative process. You have to first go through, before you can do the other pieces, you have to go through and approve the concepts. So we're not going to go through and design buildings until city council has gone through and said, yes, we agree. We want high density, large buildings in the lower area and smaller densities on the higher. And then we have an iterative process to move through and identify what the barriers are, what the opportunities are. City council has said,
You're patronizing me. That's what this planning commission is supposed
No.
to be doing. No, engaging a public involvement in deciding, because the city's not gonna.
Okay, I'm noticing that it's 7:16 and I appreciate your knowledge, Stephen, but I think it's best served if you continue emailing us. You're a robust emailer with, interesting information. We have to, as a process point, keep public input to the public input session. I don't think it serves us to have the working session. So we have a public input session at the beginning, next meeting, and we have not a public input session, and we have public comment. So I just don't want to get into Because we have,
Persuade you that you really need to figure out that you have to engage the public in putting.
well, I'm telling you that your advocacy is best served by continuing to email us. Well, that doesn't mean that we're not reading them, okay?
You're not talking about them at the meeting.
All right, we need to move on, I think, to reconsidering this implementation plan. I don't know if anyone has any comments on the aspirations and goals, because it is 7:17.
Hoping we get a little bit of time on the landing page, but did
Oh,
have some
okay.
questions.
Well, I honestly did not get through I got through the text, but not the aspirations and goals.
And we'll build out the storyboards or the art boards for the implementation so you guys can, everybody will get to see them. As I said, there are only those 8, so it'll be a pretty short board. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm having a hard time with some of these goals just because of the timing and how we're doing things concurrently. So the fact that they've been drafted by you gives me confidence that, when we're talking about these tier 1A designations and Act 250 things, while it still hasn't quite been designated what it is, I trust that these goals can make sense. It's just hard to formulate a goal and approve a goal around these land use policies that aren't formed yet. So that's why I feel like I don't have a lot of good comments, because I'm like waiting to see how things shake out. So
yeah, and they will be tricky for us as well because some of the rules haven't been written. And so we're working with the RPC, and the RPC is working on their end as well to try to make sure they understand Act 181 and the Land Use Board. The Land Use Board was just recently appointed, and they've got new members. So they're going to work for this year to come up with a lot of the rules. So we're trying to kind of position ourselves well so we're in the right place for where we expect the rules to end up. But it's possible and very likely, well, those rules, when they're adopted, won't be going into effect to 2027, but we still want to be as close as we can. And so we're working with the folks to try to position ourselves in the right place for those rules.
yeah, and I defer to your expertise for sure. I just wish I had more input to add, but I'm definitely leaning on. Yeah.
Yeah. And if there are
Leaning on your
questions,
expertise.
by all means, email me. I'm happy to talk. And let me, that one. So if we're good really quick, I would like to just flip this up, and maybe I'll turn off the lights for a quick second so you guys here can see this. So what we've had a lot of confusion of course, we've always been talking about the city plan, and we've been saying they're all on the city website right now, but eventually they're going to migrate to this new place. Welcome to the new place. So earlier, I think Ariane and Aaron probably have seen this. We haven't done anything to this right now, but I sent you this link, and it kind of has a brief introduction. One of the things I know that is wrong that'll have to change, this website is intended to serve as a companion resource to the Montpelier City Plan. No, it is not. It is not a companion resource. It is the resource. It is the city plan. So we have to make sure that that gets cleared up and is very clear. This goes back a little bit to that conversation we had about the fact that they took a little bit of editorial liberties, and we went back and said, no, let us write stuff so things don't change. So the idea was there would be a number of things. This is about the plan. There would also be some implementation. There'd be some additional links. The question starts to come up, how do we want to lay out? We know we've got two sets of pieces. We've got our storyboards. So you would, in the way this is laid out right now, you could, click on arts and you would come up with the arts and culture. So I'm kind of stuck because I got to move that. But where to put the implementation? Would we put those other ones over here on a separate page to go through and say, well, the implementation plans are over here. Now, obviously in the art board, and I'll just go through here really quick. So everything is the same. Provide feedback somewhere down here. View the full implementation strategy. You could click this and it would give you that strategies. But it was kind of meant to have a couple of ways of getting to the same point. So one option is this is the only way to get to it. I don't necessarily think that's a good idea. I would think you should be able to find it in two different ways up in here. Maybe we'd have about the plan. I would like to, if it were me, I would have about the plan, not have these first buttons, and these buttons would be on the next. We would have a button for storyboards and a button for implementation, or some other way of having it on a separate page. And the about the plan would introduce people to the plan. What is it about? How is it developed? Why is it important? And those types of things would generally be talked about in this opening about the plan. And we just need to kind of get some ideas of what you guys would think about how to organize it. I mean, otherwise I'll work with Evelyn, and she's our communications coordinator. She's very good. But if people have thoughts, another thing we had considered was we kind of like these icons. We could line these icons up vertically going down. And then to the right, we could have a button for the storyboard. We also have had requests that people want to have these in PDF form. So if we had arts and culture, we could have storyboard, we could have the PDF of the storyboard, and then we could have another button for the implementation plan. And then as you go down, you'd go to community services, or we could do it somehow with tiles where there's different icons. I could talk to her. My thought was, if these tiles were all on their own page, we could have arts and culture and have a button to hit for each one of those pieces, because we do want to have that PDF form. We've had people ask for it. That way people could download and print the arts and culture, basically the arts and culture text that is included in there. And the community services and utilities and facilities. So that was a little bit of some of the thoughts. I'm throwing a little bit out there because we don't know entirely where this was going to go. We've been working on the different pieces. So we now have all of economic development and utilities and community services and art. So all these, we have 8 chapters that are complete. Energy has been updated and has been sent to the various folks to fix. So SE Group has the updated energy changes, and Evelyn has the updated energy changes. And then that leaves us with the last 3 chapters that we were talking about doing: resilience, land use, and community services. And those have all been drafted, except land use doesn't have anything. So, but the additional resources tab was meant to be, probably doesn't have anything there right now. We were going to populate that with some extra information. It's kind of really sitting there right now. It may be removed if we don't end up using it. But what we were thinking of is if we could make this in the future, build it out to kind of be a repository of information. So what are the old a downtown master plan that was done in 2017, or streetscape master plan that was done in 2017, and the 2000 capital district master plan and the Greening America's capital plan. We could go through and populate all these additional resources in there under their respective headings. So if you wanted to know more about transportation, you could click within the transportation storyboard to go to additional resources where you might have the 2005 parking study and things we didn't talk about. But if somebody's interested, here are a whole bunch of studies that were done. We didn't talk about them because they're not relevant, but you might find them interesting. That we did a parking study at this time. We did a transportation study. We did a complete streets plan. We did a whatever, and you could go and find all these old plans that we've completed. So that was the idea of the additional resources. It may come down a little bit to time at this point. I don't know if we'll have the time to fill those out. It may be something we put into the bucket of the next time we do updates. So as we go back through a second time, maybe we go through the next time and say, we've got the plan developed. Let's do a better job with transportation, and let's go through and find all those historic documents that might be helpful. So that was the idea behind it.
So I think one of the powers of having this city plan interactive is maybe some features I'm thinking of, like a search bar somewhere. So I know we have in the synergies where different topics sort of overlap, but if people are also able to just search for natural resources, I think that would be really helpful. Maybe like a frequently asked questions. I know with your presentation, you already have a lot of fundamental information that's really helpful for people to introduce them and orient them to the master plan. So search bar, frequently asked questions. If you want to keep the tiles, I don't have a strong opinion right now. I do think that it's a good conversation that we can think on. I like a good hamburger menu, so maybe even just like over the tile, you can sort of have that menu, and you can have the implementation strategy, and you can have a PDF. I don't know. You had a lot of good suggestions. I don't have a strong opinion yet. I'm just putting that as another potential option. Also, maybe a tab just for maps instead of having them nested in each chapter. I would like to just go immediately to the maps and kind of play around with those. I don't know if the chapters are numbered. I agree. I like the icons, but if we need to number it 1 through, 12 or whatever, then throw a number on there. Those are my initial feedback.
Yeah, I'll ask them about the maps. That's an interesting idea. If they had a tab just for maps, then it might have a drop down where you'd go through, and because otherwise, I mean, we know there's probably 50 different map layers for the whole thing. I don't know if we'd have 50 different buttons, or if we have it broken out into, land use maps, and you can click that, put all those, or
Yeah, maybe have like a route category, each chapter could have its own route category, and then you kind of turn on and off like that whole section of layers nested under it, or you just have separate maps,
Yeah, I'll put it to the experts. They're the ones who know. This is all GIS based. This is ArcGIS. So I have to imagine that there's features that would let us do that, but I will check on that.
I'm sorry to,
No, we can.
I was just going to say, I'm sorry to be so tight on my schedule, but I have to actually leave. But I do like the idea of having, the relevant chapters. You can go to the implementation plans and
So if I can at least go through and say, do you like the idea of moving these 12 tiles out of about the plan? We'll put them into implementation, but it's not going to be labeled implementation. Obviously, it's going to be plan chapters. It'll have about the plan chapters. And then within the plan chapters, we would have both clicks to both resources.
yes, I like that, having the clicks to the different resources, because that's been
Okay, 'cause
something that's been
then I can work that
troublesome
out
for me.
We
Yeah.
can always go through and and fix and adjust it as we get to the public hearing step.
Yeah.
But that will at least let us start to work on forming things, getting things in the right places. And I'll work with Evelyn on that, and want to save the minutes until next time.
Yeah, I think so. Hopefully we can, and maybe we could put them, I'll try to remember to suggest that we put the minutes at the beginning so we can do them. Thanks, everybody. Sorry.
Sean with the motion to adjourn.
I second.
Second. All those
Aye.
undebatable? Aye.
Aye.